Colgan 3407 was one of those accidents that ends up impacting many different aspects of aviation regulations. It happened in February 2009. It was a almost brand new Bombardier Q400 operated by Colgan Airways under the Continental Connection branding. And it ended up crashing it was arriving to land supposed to be landing at Buffalo International Airport, ended up going into a stall which the crew did not recover from, and it crashed into a house, killing one person on the ground and all 50 people in the Q400. And how I've heard this described as how it impacted aviation safety and aviation regulations is the FAA was basically mandated by Congress to fix lots of different issues. And so if you have a mouse in your house, you're probably going to use a mouse trap. That would be an appropriate way to kill a mouse. You're not going to shoot it with a shotgun. But I've heard this accident as being described as a shotgun versus a mouse, as far as what the ramifications ended up being as far as regulations that came out of this, directly out of this accident. So we had changes to crew records, to crew required training, crew certification requirements, duty and flight time, and we're going to talk just very briefly about a few of those here. So first of all, a pilot records database was mandated by the FAA. The captain of the flight, Colgan 3407, had some past history of issues passing check rides, issues with stall recoveries that was uncovered, of course, after the accident. I'm not sure if Colgan knew about that when they hired this captain, but this was a requirement basically told to the FAA by the House of Representatives that the FAA was going to make a pilot record database so that airlines could look at this when determining who they were going to hire and if they had anything they should know about in their background. They also required the flight crew members to undergo very comprehensive pre-employment screening for pilots. Apparently seeing that maybe there was an issue with this with some of the regional airlines, that they didn't feel like the screening was good enough, and so it was basically written into this requirement for the FAA to come up with a way for air carriers to have to do pre-employment screening for pilots. This change was a really big one as far as flight crew member qualifications. Previously to this accident, it was allowed that air carriers could hire to fly as a co-pilot or the first officer position. They could have a commercial pilot certificate. The FAA was then mandated in this HR 5900, this act, that all flight crew members had to obtain an airline transport pilot certificate, which really raised the bar because now all airline pilots that were going to be hired by all 121 air carriers had to have 1,500 total flight hours, because that's what's required for total time to be an airline transport pilot certificate. So ended up that you'll see in the next few slides, they did take away some of that for certain qualified people, but this was a huge change. Prior to this, ExpressJet, Colgan, Envoy, well, it was actually called American Eagle back then, Mesa, SkyWest, they were hiring people with 500 hours total time, maybe even sometimes less. No more after Colgan 3407 and the fallout from that accident. So here we can see our aeronautical experience required for the airline transport pilot certificate. Full details you can see in 14 CFR 61.159. But yes, basically 1,500 total hours, 500 hours cross country, 250 hours PIC, and age 23 at a minimum. The airlines naturally said, well, wait a minute, we want to hire some people that are younger than age 23, for example, and maybe they have less than 1,500 total hours. So through a very lengthy process, the FAA eventually came out with the restricted airline transport pilot certificate. And this certificate is allowed to be issued to someone so that they can go to work for a 121 air carrier, and they can have this restricted airline transport pilot certificate and still operate as a first officer. And the rules are somewhat clear, however, it's not always clear if the courses that you're taking apply toward the 60 credit hour total coursework requirement. So in looking at that 60 credit hour total coursework, we see for someone with a bachelor's degree, number one, that bachelor's degree program has to be approved by the FAA, that specific degree program, and that person has to take at least 60 hours, credit hours, of courses that apply towards credits that the FAA has said are okay to apply to this restricted ATP requirement. If somebody has a bachelor's or an approved associate's degree, but they don't have, for example, if it's a bachelor's degree and they don't have 60 credit hours, they just have 30 to 59 credits on these approved subject areas approved by the FAA, then they can get the restricted ATP, but it's at 1,250 total hours. It does reduce the age, so the age can go down to age 21. There's some good articles that I've provided a link to, and for LeTourneau University students, we have an excellent website up that tells you all the requirements, all the courses that the FAA has approved for you to be able to take that apply toward this 60 credit hour requirement. But it's just important to know this because as you're getting toward the end of your flight training, you want to make sure that you do have 60 credit hours approved coursework, because it's not just any aviation course that is offered by any college. It again has to go through a somewhat rigorous approval process with the FAA. And most aviation colleges, if they are helpful to their students, they're going to provide this information to you online or somehow so you can see what courses are approved. If not, you should be asking questions on if those courses are approved and they credit toward that 60 credit hours total coursework, because 60 is really the magic number when you're looking at a restricted ATP.